What is Americans' infatuation with guns? This is something I kind of wanted to talk about. I know there is 1,000,005 videos talking about us bloody Americans and our infatuation with guns, and even to the point of crassness, right? The anti-gun folks and the people that don't quite understand our American culture when it comes to firearms, they result to demonizing us down to our sexual organs. That's how ridiculous it is. But it is so much deeper than that. And I know a lot of you get this already, but this is kind of a video I thought I'd just kind of make on the fly. Hopefully everything I have in my brain can come out of my mouth and we can have this conversation. But I think it's important to understand why Americans love guns so much. We have to kind of go back in time. That's really the only way to really get the source kind of maybe locked into our brains. So let's jump way back there. By the way, this is Steve with the Range Minded Podcast. I'm glad you guys decided to hang out in this video. Hopefully it's fun. Hopefully I can keep this high paced enough. I hope I'm not going to be too boring and drawn out. I do have a plan in my head. Like I say, hopefully I can get it out of my mouth. We'll see how this works out. You can tell I'm still struggling with my cough. I am slightly medicated, so I'm not quite sure how this video is going to turn out. Hopefully it's good. I have a sneaking hunch that I'm going to be editing this video a lot. Anyway, maybe you won't see those edits. That'd be great. So let's start at the beginning. So we got to go way back before even colonial America. We're talking, the original colonies. I guess that is colonial America. You're right. So we got to go back to England. So we got to understand that there was a group of people that felt really repressed, whether it be religious or any other freedoms that they had, a freedom of expression by the crown. And they knew that there had to be something better at that time in England. Obviously, there's a lot of enlightenment happening, a lot of religious excitement. People were learning how to read and how to reason in a way that the crown wasn't really used to. Basically what it boils down to, right? We get a group of folks to say, okay, we know that the crown has colonies across the pond. We're going to go check it out. We're going to settle it. And I think in the beginning, the crown was totally cool with it. First of all, it kind of got rid of the riffraff. I imagine they were sick of these noisy people walking around telling people how there's more to life than the king. So here we go, right? They send over there. We end up in Plymouth, right? We get the original colonies and the Magna Carta and all this stuff, right? I'm not a historian. I'm probably going to get stuff wrong. This is just the way it is out of my mouth. But we have this set of rules, right? And along with those rules, even then, subjects of the crown had the ability to have arms for offense and defense. There's documents pointing that out. You can look it up yourself. You don't have to take my word for it. Honestly, don't take my word for any of this stuff. This is again, my perception. Of course, the king wasn't going to let anybody go rampant and do all the self-defense stuff that they wanted to, but they did have the ability to protect themselves and provide for themselves and their families. And a lot of those folks, when they came across the pond, the ocean, to the original colonies, they understood that there was a natural instinct for self-defense and self-preservation and the preservation of the community. That's an important thing. You also got to understand the point of keeping each other safe from whatever adversary there might be. And yeah, there was. I'm not going to get into the whole political Native American thing. I'm not going to get into that. I'm not going to get into slavery. I'm not interested in these topics because that's not what this show's about. But what we are talking about is the defense of the populace from any kind of enemy, okay? Not just for hunting. Did they use their original firearms for hunting? Absolutely. It was a tool. It was a tool that provided life and safety, much like they do now. That they're still providing sustenance for life and safety for families and individuals in this country. And that's important for us to really understand and grasp it from the beginning, because that's really where the Americans' love of their arms begins. Is before America even was. The United States anyways, as it was. So here we are. Time flies by. The colonies end up being pretty profitable. It was good crops, good grounds. The king, I imagine, he was starting to feel kind of frustrated, right? They've been there for decades. They've established communities, estates, plantations, all sorts of stuff. Yeah, I know we're not going to talk about slavery. I get it. That stuff existed. It's over. Get over it. Okay, we're not talking about it. Why do I keep bringing it up? I guess, huh? White privilege. But during that whole time as well, craftsmen were there in the colonial United States, learning how to build and refine their craft and developing arms for the people in this country at that time. They had developed militias. They understood that there was an adversarial component between the French and the Indians and whatever else interfering with their lives, not to mention the vast amount of wild beasts that were out there that they would have to defend themselves, as well as they're exploring the frontier or developing their properties for crops. It was a vital part of their lives from the beginning. That's what I really want to bring it down to. It was a vital part. As time goes on, the king obviously is really frustrated, and the founding fathers had to make an important judgment call. It was either time, because the pressure from England was so high when it came to crime or whatever. If the king didn't like what was going on, he would use his heavy fist of tyranny and shove it down the throat of these Americans, of these early colonial Americans, to the point it was devastating for many of them. If there was any kind of grievance or whatever, sometimes he'd put them on a prison ship and they would have to sail back to England to go to trial. It just wasn't fair. It wasn't how a free society was meant to live, and the founding fathers knew this. And then obviously, right, we get the founding documents. The founding fathers meet in their Continental Congress over many weeks, trying to figure out exactly a way to present to the king that we're tired of your shit, basically. And they did. They came up with the Declaration of Independence, right? And our Bill of Rights that we felt was so important to keep men free. And it was at that point that the American culture extremely braced freedom. They understood that there was either two choices to make at this time. Either they live under despotism and tyranny and always under the heavy boot of an authoritarian monarch that didn't even want to come to the States, didn't even care, just wanted to be a dick about it, I guess, to put it in a less polite term. Or they had to say, enough, we are meant to be free. We know we are meant to free. Now, I know God comes into this conversation a lot. There's a lot of folks, well, they were atheists and they were non-theists or whatever. I get that. But what we did understand is they used the Judeo-Christian model of freedom because it was the most encompassing and honestly the most free perspective of how to keep a soul free from tyranny. And I'm not talking like heaven and hell type stuff. I'm talking an individual's rights to defend themselves, to protect their property, to protect their family from any kind of adversary. And that's like where it's really started to get fortified, right? We had years of independence away from the crown, and I'm sure there was lots of falling. There was lots of bad things that happened as well. I get that, but it was a taste of freedom that nobody on earth had, at least for a very, very long time. And it was extremely popular. Obviously, it was popular. We fought a war over it. But what really starts to cement the Second Amendment, in my perspective, is the battles at Lexington and Concord, right? The whole purpose, I guess let's jump back a little bit. During these decades of freedom, basically, away from the crown, the founding fathers knew and understood there had to be some kind of a defensive mechanism against anything. I know we just kind of talked about that, but this is where the idea of the militia comes in. It was everybody, able-bodied male, was required to be in the militia. They were required to supply their own rifles. They were required to have tools of offense and defense. They needed these things, and these people owned these things. It was understood, and it was an accepted practice to have firearms in your home, along with whatever other defensive means necessary. You can go back and look at the Militia Act that George Washington presented, and it really does dive into what we're talking about here. I'm not going to bring this up here. I don't want to make this movie. I don't want to make this a movie. I just want to make this a video. But there is lots of founding documents to support the individual right to keep and bear arms, and that was established and well understood and well respected in the colonials. But as the Battle of Concord comes in, the purpose was to get into the armories and take the means of the people's defense away from them. And that really, like I say, I think that is really the part where the gun culture, if you will, in the United States was cemented and really faceted into our freedoms. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. As that statement was really absorbed into the American soul, our founding fathers and those who fought for independence understood that key, and it is a key. The Second Amendment has never, ever, ever, ever been about hunting, ever. It's about keeping the adversary at bay and having means to defend yourself. And it that is, like I say, that Concord and Lexington really, that is the binding agent of the Second Amendment in the American culture. Now we can go, work our way forward. Obviously, through the frontier days, the development of the country, there were still lots of things going on, right? Between native wars or whatever, there was a lot of stuff that happened. Plus, we still had issues with the British and the French that never really ever went away, at least not for a long time. Again, I'm not a historian. I don't care if you fact check me on this. I'm not a historian. I don't pretend to be a historian. But why does that bring us here today? Now, the reason why, for me, anyways, I can only speak from my experience, my journey through the Second Amendment, because I know that journey the best. For me, guns have never been a thing about evil, and never been a thing about military use, right? I totally understand that the uses can be for adversarial reasons. We understand that. But we need to also remember that those who sacrificed to give us these rights, the founding fathers literally put everything they had on the table to establish this country. Everything. Even their sacred honor was presented to the king to tell him to take a hike. It was a huge sacrifice for those men, and not to mention the thousands of other colonial Americans stuck in the middle of the War of Independence, and some on both sides. Right? We know there was people sympathetic to either side of that conflict, which is honestly a good thing. I know that may sound kind of terrible and weird way to say it, but we need differences of opinions to maintain our freedom as well. Something else you guys really need to put in the old brain bucket up there is it's good to have opposition in our opinions so we can conversate and create solutions and not just be hard-headed and locked up only to be in our own castle. That being said, I'm a no compromise kind of guy when it comes to the Second Amendment because it is an individual right granted by God, not given by the government, and I'll never be convinced that the government can grant me anything. The Constitution was never written as here's a Christmas wish list for the citizens. It is a restriction upon the government. You need to understand that as well. Hopefully, many of you do get that. If you haven't come to that conclusion, start reading some contemporary founding documents, Federalist Papers, that kind of thing. You need to understand Brownstone's commentaries. You need to understand these things to understand that the Constitution is a restriction on government, not on the populace. Anyway, let's jump forward a few hundred years. Okay, back to my experience. My first rifle, and I'm pretty sure I've talked about this before. My first rifle was given to me on I think my 17th birthday, 18th birthday. 17th or 18th birthday. I got a Norinco SKS, not NKS, SKS. I told you I'm on drugs trying to get rid of this cough, so my language is a little slurred. They're not illegal drugs. They're not fun drugs. They're just boring, regular, over-the-counter stuff. And that first rifle changed everything for me. Everything. I was never, the house I grew up in, we had a couple guns around the house. My dad never took us shooting. He built his own muzzle loader, which was cool. I think I may have shot it once in my entire life. It's a pretty looking gun, but I never really shot it. My grandfather's shotgun was inherited. I've shot that a few times growing up, maybe a handful of times. My dad was a busy guy. He wasn't really into guns. He was never against guns. My mom's kind of the same way. She was maybe leaned a little bit more apathetic away from the firearms community, but never against it, I guess is the best way to put it. But we did shoot a little bit as kids. Once in a while, my uncle, my mom's brother, was totally down with a Second Amendment, which I was totally cool with too. Because guns, for me, guns are not just an object; they're works of art. They're mechanical wonders. The way they feel, the way they smell, the way they operate, all that stuff just gets me all tingly inside. And I love guns. I'm not going to tell you that I don't. I'm one of those crazy infatuated people. As my firearms journey progressed, by the time I was able to purchase a handgun, 21 years old, that's the way it works in the United States. I went to a dealer and I purchased a handgun. Probably that first week of me turning 21, honestly, I'm not going to lie. And I still have that gun. I still have that firearm. I've done some modifications to it. I'm not going to show it to you. It doesn't matter what it looks like. I'll just tell you I still have that firearm. And as my attraction for, boy, that does kind of sound sexual now. You took it that way. It's not sexual. As my desire to understand the gun community more, as it grew, I understood that I wanted to share my desire for these firearms to the other people who started where I started, with nothing, right? With only more than a little bit of knowledge. Guns, in my perspective, folks that are new to the firearms community, they have some apprehension, which I think is important. And as an instructor, I look for the folks that may be a little bit more recessed from using a firearm, because to me it tells me that they actually understand that there's a commitment and that there's a huge responsibility involved. The folks that just jump in, dive right into a class and they want to handle guns, those are usually the people I have to worry about when I teach my classes, because they're most likely going to be unsafe at the range. But the new lady shooters, the younger shooters, people that just haven't been around guns. In Idaho, where I live, there's a lot of influx of people coming in from as refugees, if you will, coming in from states that have way less friendly gun laws. And so it's just a new thing for them. And honestly, when I teach classes, those really are my favorite people to teach, the ones that are kind of scared of using a firearm. Because I know I can build off a good, healthy foundation and not try to fix a bunch of muddied information, repair a foundation. I'm a contractor guy, so like you can't build on a really poor foundation. You need to have something solid. And if a new shooter's there that's kind of apprehensive, a little bit afraid, intimidated of that gun, that means I can build a good solid foundation and help them on that journey. That's how I look at it. But there's a dichotomy, right? We kind of talked about this in the beginning of the video, that there's this adversarial viewpoint of firearms and the United States. And it's hard to get around, because these people from outside of countries, like I have friends in Australia, I have friends in England, you can own guns in these countries. It's not illegal to own a gun in Australia. It's not illegal to own a gun in England. It's just extremely regulated, because here it's a right. It is an enumerated right from our founding documents. Outside of the United States, there is no Second Amendment. There's privileges granted by the government. And that's why the mentality of the United States rifle owner or handgun owner or whatever is different than those from other countries. And that's why these other countries are never going to comprehend it, because they've never had to fight their way with their rifle as a way to get rid of the king quite like the United States did. Yes, I understand Ukraine, whatever. I get it, but it's not the same. It's not the same. America is different. It just is, whether you want to admit it or not. The negative stigma, in my perspective, when it comes to firearms, really does come from Hollywood. So anytime you turn on a TV show, anytime you watch Law and Order, whatever crappy dramas you want to watch, usually the gun owners are one of two segmented people. Usually it's the real idiot hillbilly that's super careless, that's going to point his gun at his neighbors because whatever, the chickens were making a mess, whatever, right? It's usually somebody that's completely stupid and amazingly unsafe. I guess it's three categories. So there's that first category, the idiot hillbilly. And then you got this vigilante justice guy that the cops aren't doing their job, so I'll take care of it and do it myself, which is obviously reckless. It's outside the bounds of the law. Or it's the bad guy, right? So there's one of those three stereotypes that the media pushes about gun owners. Usually the first category, the hillbilly type, they push as this guy that thinks everybody should own a tank, everybody should have nuclear weapons, whatever. That's fine. Honestly, whatever. We won't go down that road quite yet. But they create the hillbilly guy as this overtly ridiculous, really right-wing extreme guy that is basically anarchy, right? The government shouldn't exist. We can talk about that too. There's things I think in the government that shouldn't exist, but that's a different story. And so it creates this negative stereotype about the hunter, the country guy that owns the gun. And then when you get to the vigilante guy, it's kind of sexy, right? You think about the movies in the 80s that came out, like not Heat, what was that? Cobra and all these other ones that came out about the same time as, honestly, like Dirty Harry. So really the 70s, where crime was really high in the big cities, and it didn't seem like the cops had a grasp on exactly how to handle it. And so these vigilante movies came out, and people were like, yeah, let's get rid of crime. And it bolstered that, but it still had a negative viewpoint on firearms ownership. You also got to throw in there, you had like the Reagan assassination attempt. You had Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, all these things from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. They kind of compiled and dysmorphed the viewpoint of firearms ownership in a way that it was negative. Like, they still do it today. There are some good pro-gun movies out there, I guess, but there's not a lot. Then the bad guy mentality, right? Like, I'll throw in some videos of like Heat. There's sexy movie scenes, right, where the gunfights are just raw and they're full of excitement and it's full of emotion, but it's still the bad guy running the gun. Once in a while, the cop does a good thing, right? Eventually, the cop wins out. But it's the real gritty and in-your-face parts are always the bad guys running the guns and making a mess, right? And causing a lot of emotion. Hollywood has been really successful at creating these negative stereotypes through these movies that they create. But in reality, the true American gun owner, and we're talking 48% of all households in the United States have at least one firearm in it. 48%, that's a lot of guns. Not all of them have one gun, but 48% at least have one gun. Think about those numbers. That's pretty staggering. So the reality of these stereotypes, I mean, that's exactly what it is. It's a stereotype. The true American patriot that keeps and bears arms are not any one of those three people. Could they be? Sure. Are there segments of the population that fit every one of those stereotypes? Yeah, absolutely. I've run a lot of ranges. I've taught a lot of classes. I've met a lot of people. I have met people that could probably fall in all three of those categories. But it's still an unfair representation of what we really have in the United States. Through my years of my firearms journey, and again, I call it journey because I'm still on this path of understanding the Second Amendment and teaching people along the way. Everybody, the vast majority of people that I talk to are very safety oriented. When I teach my class, safety is the number one priority. That is the first thing we talk about, and we talk about it over and over and over again. It never, ever ends. The safety standpoint of firearms ownership is the pinnacle of my classes when I teach, and it should be any instructor's class when they teach. God forbid we have any kind of accident when we're on the range. That would be terrible. But as the American populace moves towards gaining gun ownership, it's like the left or the anti-gunners, because there's right anti-gun folks too. We'll just call them anti-2As. They really push back on that gun ownership. You always hear the story like, guns are the number one killer of children in the United States. But the problem is they're not relaying the entire information. They're taking the demographic of 0 to 25 years old. I don't know any 25-year-old children. I know people that act like children at 25, but they're not children. But they take from 0 to 25 and say all these people, the number one killer of all these people are firearms. But in reality, it starts at about 15, 16 years old, which is still too young. But out of the majority, most of those are 18 to 25-year-olds, and it's in gang violence. It's in urban areas and high gang violence. So the representation is unfair. And honestly, you can dig this information up on yourself. I've talked about this ad nauseum on the show before, but you can look back and see, you can see where, by age group, what the cause of death, mortality rates, and what they are. It's not hard to find. And that's what's super frustrating is people just like, they'll take these blanket statements and roll with it. And it's unfair and it's untrue. The other thing they're going to tell you is like the AR-15 is a weapon of war. I have yet to find any military ever in the world to issue an AR-15. Does it look like an M16? Yeah, it does look like an M16. Does it function like an M16? Unfortunately, all my AR-15s do not have a select fire trigger. I wish they did. But no commander in his right mind would send a military unit out with just an AR-15. They're ineffective in military use for a lot of reasons. Are they effective? Can you take a life? Absolutely. If you think about it, areas where there's more swimming pools, more kids are going to be dying in swimming pools, dying of drownings. The death rate of drowning in a swimming pool in Idaho is far lower than in San Francisco. So you got to understand, you got to extrapolate the data and understand how they're collecting the data. So don't fall into that trap. Again, with the weapons of war thing, they ad nauseum, they try to create this boogeyman out of the AR-15. Right now, there's over 20 million AR-15s in public hands. I'm willing to bet that number is probably double what they're saying, because there's a lot. Now, if the AR-15 was truly the issue, we would know. We would absolutely know. Less than 2% of all mass shooting events happen where there's an AR-15 involved. Almost all of them are handguns. And again, this information is easy to find through the FBI. It's not hidden. It's not secret information. They're making it harder to research, by the way. If you want to keep track of it, you probably should start downloading some of this data because it exists. It's an unfair representation. And it's important for you to understand that again, the AR-15 has never, ever, ever, to my understanding, been issued as a military service rifle. Now, somebody said, well, what about the Ukraine? Yeah, do you know what? A bunch of American manufacturers sent a bunch of AR-15s to the Ukrainian people. But it was not an issued rifle by the military. That was a donation from a friendly country, probably too friendly of a country, honestly. So it's not quite the same. It doesn't meet the criteria in my perspective. But here we are, right? Here we are today with millions and millions of guns. There's somewhere around 500 million guns in public circulation, somewhere around that. Again, that number is extremely low, and like 100 and something million standard capacity magazines, which I think is fantastic. We need to bump those numbers up. And it's also important to understand, like, between colonial America and the systems that were set up to keep a way for the citizenry to protect themselves from tyranny, again, which is what the Second Amendment is designed for, is a protection against the government. And don't give me the crap about, well, you need F-16s and nuclear bombs and fighter jets or whatever. The Taliban seem to do pretty good living in caves and AKs, just saying. Plus, that whole perspective is completely skewed. You're assuming that the military is going to fight against its own people. There'll be a segment that I think would be willing to, but a vast majority is not going to do that. So that's a pretty failed argument right off the get-go. Let's kind of shift things up. For me, I really love semi-automatic handguns. Like I said, my first real handgun was I think it was either the Springfield XD or it was a Kimber 1911. I know I'm gonna get hate for either one of those choices. It was one of those two. They were bought very close to the same time frame. It was years ago. But since then, I've picked up a lot of. It's clear. You can see it's clear. I picked up a lot of Glocks. Excuse me, but my mic over the years. Now, the nice thing about the Glock style pistols, in my perspective, is and it doesn't have to be a Glock. When I mean Glock style, I'm talking like polymer frame, striker fired, lots of internal safety stuff. It was really a game changer to the firearms community back in the 80s, because we really saw Glocks come in the late mid 80s to the United States. 90s it went rampant, and since then a lot of manufacturers have gone that same injection molded internal framed idea of a safe action pistol. They have revolutionized the way for people to defend themselves. Now, let's talk about defensive use. I know this is, again, I'm on drugs right now, so I'm kind of rambling around. When we talk about defensive gun uses, I kind of want to hit a bunch of these things. Like I said, this video is really kind of off the fly, and just whatever it is. When we talk about defensive gun uses, that's another really big misnomer or a lead that keeps getting buried in the news. I believe it was in 2011, Barack Obama cited the CDC to do some defensive gun research. Now, that was published, I believe, in 2013, maybe somewhere between 2011 and 2013. The CDC produced their research on defensive gun use. Obviously, Obama was looking for a way to create another assault weapons ban to restrict the rights of the people and to show that nobody uses guns to defend themselves. It's a lie. But unfortunately, the numbers didn't correlate with what they thought it really was. In fact, the CDC came back with numbers. It was like 1,900 times a day, or so. It was a ridiculous amount of, highly. Okay, let's try this again. The amount of defensive gun use was extremely higher than what they anticipated, which was good, because that information was then available to the public. I have been unable to find that study. I believe it's been scrubbed off all of the CD stuff. I think I have it. I mentioned this before in a couple of videos ago. I think I might have that study actually stored on another computer. I got to go dig it out. But it's an eye opener. Now, obviously, once a negative gun administration sees these numbers and realizes that, well, that didn't turn out the way I wanted it to, they didn't talk about it. They bury it. They hide it. But folks like John Lott caught a hold of it. Crime Prevention Research Center caught a hold of the information, and he's like, well, that seems like it's way too high. And when he did the study, he found that the numbers were probably actually higher. We're talking millions of times a year guns are used in a defensive way to save a life, which is far more than they are used to take a life. Intriguing, absolutely intriguing. With these studies that they want to hide, like I say, they're trying to manipulate the judgment of the people and continue this negative connotation that they push out through Hollywood and honestly video games. Years ago, I did a podcast on our video games making our kids more violent. I think that's probably, that could be a huge possibility, but causation, correlation, I don't know. But as we understand that defensive gun use is far higher then it breaks down what the anti-gunners are really trying to say. Are there too many shooting events in the United States? Yeah, 100%. The other thing that they talk about when they collect the data on a mass shooting, those definitions have changed a lot over the years. Now they use a definition that incorporates everything. Even gang violence, they can throw into that mass shooting calculator and tell you that there's been more mass shootings than days of the year. They manipulate the data, but in reality, some of those are not mass shootings. Some of those are domestic violence, where there just happens to be a certain number of people there. Again, there's a lot of street violence that gets thrown in there, which is terrible. I wish it didn't happen. It does. But you need to understand that the numbers that are produced about mass shooting events are not accurate. And the other problem is they'll tell you right now, when we've talked about this a lot before, that crime has gone down under the Biden administration. But in reality, reporting of crime has gone down because they've restricted the avenues to get that to the FBI. So a lot of, it's like 20% of all reporting from all precincts across the country. It might even be more than 20%. I think that's what it was when I did the research. I could very well be wrong on that. But 20% of that crime doesn't get reported at all. Of course, the data is going to show that crime's been down, but then they manipulate the data to tell you that, yeah, shootings have gone up. So you need to be really careful. What I guess is what I'm digging down to. When you do the research, and you need to do the research because you can only glean this information and retain it yourself as you study it. I'm confident that the research I've done is correct. I spent a lot of time on the NICS background stuff. I look at that a lot. I look at the FBI data. I can't remember what the acronym for the FBI. It's pretty easy. You just Google it. You can find all the data from the FBI. I've downloaded hundreds of files from online about that kind of stuff. I try to, every time I find data like that, I try to download it now because of the CDC thing vanishing. Let's turn real quick, and I know I do ramble a little bit. Let's turn real quick to purchasing firearms. I'm not going to show you what's in my safe. Not that I don't trust you. You don't need to see inside my gun safe. One of them. But the reality is I own a couple guns. Okay, it doesn't matter how many I own. It's none of your business how many I own. It's none of your business how many anybody owns. If somebody wants to share that information, that's fine. But I'm not going to share you that information because it's none of your damn business. But we need to talk about how to purchase a gun, or the process of what really takes to purchase a gun. Now, the anti-gun people tell you can just go to any gun show. You can pick up a gun from a dealer. You can walk out the same day, and then you can go shoot everybody in a parking lot. That's not how it works. It's never how it's worked. By federal law, any FFL holder has to, no matter if he's at a gun show, if he's selling out of his house or whatever, he has to produce a background check to the FBI through the NICS system by federal law. That is not always. That's existed since the 90s, and that is just the way it is. Private sales, yeah, you can do a private sale without a background check. There is no federal law against that. But if you are a licensed gun dealer and you are not doing background checks, you will lose your license and you will go to federal prison. There's tons of revocations that have happened over the last few years because of background check paperwork, which I'll refer to as a 4473. That's what it is, a federal document 4473. If those are filled out wrong, or if there's no background check given, or if there's a discrepancy in something that's called a bound book, meaning the dealer has to keep record of every serialized firearm in the premises at all times. It has to be a live living document. It has to be up to date. If there's any kind of discrepancies, the FFL could actually lose his license and could be criminally charged if it's bad. It's happened before. So the whole background check exists. Don't be fooled that it doesn't. It exists. It is there, other than for private sellers. So when they talk about universal background checks, and I know a lot of you already know this, but maybe some of you don't. When they talk about the universal background check system, is what they're saying is they want to know every firearms transaction, whether it be from public or private party, no matter what. They want to know exactly what gun is where at any moment, at any time in the United States. Now, some of you say, well, what's wrong? What's wrong with that? The biggest problem is that it's called a gun registry. It is the only way they can collect that information. The only way that they can retain that information and keep that information up to date is if they have a living, live gun registry in a federal database, which is against federal law. When the NICS system came into play, that was part of the agreement. There is not a gun registry. You cannot retain that information. Does the ATF retain information? Most likely, because as gun dealers go belly up or whatever, or revocations of licenses happen, the federal government comes in and they take all those records. So they do have all those records already. Whether they say, when Dettelbach was last up there in the hearing, he says there's no way to search that database, but that isn't a digital record. I call bullshit on that. If it's in a digital record, you can search it, which is against federal law. They're breaking federal law. So our background, our mandatory background checks, whatever, is that a viable, feasible, legal option? In my opinion, no, because you're breaking federal law. And we do not need a gun registry. It's none of the government's damn business what I own privately. The other thing that really gets my goat is the whole gun buyback thing. The government can't buy something that buy back something that they've never owned. When it comes to our enumerated rights, if the government seizes anything from us, they have to properly compensate for what they take. But with the red flag law stuff, I've got some friends that have dealt with some red flag things. Some of those folks have never gotten their guns back, and they've never been compensated. So they're breaking federal law again through the red flag system, red flag laws. What a red flag law is if you feel like somebody's a danger, you can call the cops. The cops will come and take all their firearms before there's any kind of trial. There's no due process. They come in and they take the stuff and then they leave, and then you go through a trial, which is also a violation of our federal rights. So red flag laws are not good at all. Are there avenues out there to keep people from doing that? Yeah, there actually is stuff in existence right now through places like the National Shooting Sports Foundation, and there's some veteran suicide helpline type stuff where people are you can contact somebody, where somebody can come and hang on to the guns. They're not taking them away, but they're just they just give an avenue for folks that might be struggling. That stuff already exists in the private sector. The government does not need to be involved in stealing people's property and not returning it. So I am definitely not a red flag guy. The other thing that is a real big buzzword right now is the assault weapons ban. And I know I've probably done several episodes on the assault weapons ban. Here is the problem in my understanding of the assault weapons ban. It says any semi-automatic firearm with a detachable magazine, more than 10 rounds, is considered an assault weapon. So what that means is you can't see my AR-15 sitting back there on the chair, or my Glock, anything with a standard capacity magazine over 10 rounds is considered an assault weapon, or even a detachable magazine. So that encompasses hundreds of millions of firearms in existence in the United States. They're not taking away the AR-15. They want to take away anything semi-automatic. That includes bird guns, right? If you got a sweet Benelli or something that you love to take bird hunting that cycles real fast when it uses the piston, that is a semi-automatic. And those semi-automatic shotguns are subject to the assault weapons ban. If you don't believe me, look it up. I know I've done at least 2 videos on this, and I'm pretty sure a lot of those videos have stuff linked in the description. It's a mess. Why do I think that the guns are so scrutinized right now by the public? The media, again, the news and the media have been very successful at creating a negative connotation on firearms ownership. Because they've been manipulated through the news and through the media. They think that we're either a dumb hillbilly that points our gun at anything we want and doesn't care, a vigilante, or a criminal. And they've been very successful at creating that. How do we, as gun owners, I don't want to say retaliate because that's negative. How do we fight back? I really don't know the better way to put it right now. How do we fight back against that kind of action? First of all, we need to be good stewards of the Second Amendment. On the podcast, I always talk about being a good steward of the Second Amendment. What do I mean about being a good steward? First of all, we have to be a good example. We have to be a good gun owner. In my opinion, if you have firearms, they need to be locked up. It's not a law. I don't think there should be a law about it. But I think as a respectable gun owner, you should probably be putting stuff away. First of all, they're extremely valuable. If they get stolen or whatever, you could be liable in some cases. Why not just have some kind of a lockbox or a small safe or something to lock them up? There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But it's your prerogative. You can do what you want to do. I believe in freedom. But as we become better stewards of the Second Amendment, we understand the laws that are being pushed up against us. We understand how to articulate why those laws are not good. We need to understand the stuff that's coming out of the Supreme Court and why that benefits or hinders our freedom. And really, the biggest thing is understanding that the Constitution and all of its amendments, the original Bill of Rights and its amendments, are there for a reason. The Second Amendment is there for a purpose and is not for hunting. It is to secure the freedom of the populace against a tyrannical government, and it always has been. Always has been. And if you don't believe me, again, do some contemporary search of documents at the same time when the founding documents were written. Spend time in the Federalist Papers. You're going to be enlightened. Again, Brownstone's commentaries, that kind of stuff. That stuff exists. And it's almost free. It's basically free. You just look online and you can actually do the research yourself. When it comes to modern rulings like the Supreme Court, a lot of that stuff is a lot of mumbo jumbo. I think it's important that, if I do a video on it, I'd love you to watch videos when I talk about Supreme Court rulings. That's great. That's fantastic. But I'm not a scholar. I'm not a legal guy. I'm not any kind of an attorney. So I miss a lot of stuff. So you need to broaden your search. There's a lot of content out there that is really good at breaking down the information for you to digest, so you can articulate your perspective to other people. The other thing that's important is we need to learn how to have a dialogue with people that don't see the Second Amendment the way that we do. I think in the Second Amendment community, we are so good at fighting with each other about the stupidest stuff. Like really stupid stuff. There wasn't too long ago, there was a couple of YouTube content creators that I respect and I like their content, but they went back and forth about one stupid thing for like 3 hours on this live. Didn't resolve anything. It was the biggest waste of time in my entire life. And hopefully everybody that was watching their lives realized where they wasted, hours on something stupid. We need to stop fighting with each other. There's no time to fight with each other when it comes to the Second Amendment. Our adversaries are plentiful, and our energies need to be focused on how to unite and how to articulate our love for our freedoms, not just the Second Amendment. Again, for me, the Second Amendment is a huge part of my life because, I do a podcast about it. I teach firearms. I love everything about guns. It's a huge part of my life. And I incorporate that part into my life. That is a deal breaker for me when I hear somebody like Kamala Harris and Tim Walz talking about they're going to do an executive order on an assault weapons ban. They can't, by the way. That's not how that works. They're not Congress. They can't do that. But it makes me fired up, right? The only change we're going to make is starting in our homes and in our communities. And then, at a state level. That's where we need to really be focusing. You need to be involved in the local, the local gun groups first. Support your local gun dealers. Help them any way you can. Learn the process. Like, when I was selling guns, running ranges, I actually enjoyed having a lot of those folks as company in the store. People that are curious about how things work. I'm okay with that, as long as you're not a time vampire. That's it's kind of a deal breaker. But as you get more involved in the Second Amendment community, you get involved in your states' rights groups and then some of the federal groups, which there are a lot of really amazing federal 2A groups out there that are really actually fighting for your rights in the trenches. There are some amazing groups out there that actually do what they're going to say they're going to do. There's one group that doesn't really do a lot. We've talked about that group before. I'm not going to talk about them right now either. Anyway, I know this is probably kind of a long, drawn out, ridiculous, dumb video. But I guess I better come back to the answer why we're so infatuated. Like, tidy this up. Like, let's bring it together, Steve. Let's tidy it up. The Second Amendment is so important to the United States community, because first of all, it is part of our original identity. We were born rebels, if you will. We were meant to be free, and we will fight to be free. And the Second Amendment not only stands as a symbol of our right to freedom, but it's actually a physical doorstop against tyranny. And it allows us as the American people to fight for our freedom. That is the number one reason why Americans are so diehard 2A. I know there's not all of them. It's at least 48%. And the symbols that come along with that, whether it be the AR-15, whether it be a semi-automatic handgun, a revolver, whatever, those symbols are the icon of freedom. Whether you like the way the AR-15 looks or not, it is the icon of don't tread on me. It is the true American spirit that says, hey, I am meant to be free. God wants me to be free. The government can't make me free. Only God can give me my rights, and only God can take them away. And from the spirit of Concord and the spirit of the colonies till today, that desire to maintain freedom, that drive to keep our children safe and free is always going to be there. And I know a lot of those countries that don't have the Second Amendment aren't really going to grasp it. I mean, look what's going on in England right now. It's tragic. They took the English government took its citizens' ability to defend themselves away, and now they're seeing this huge wave of violence from a community I feel like was sent there to usurp the government and change the whole makeup of the UK. That kind of same stuff can happen here in the United States if we let the government take our freedoms away from us. It will happen here. Look at South Africa after Rhodesia. I mean, it's the same process. And America is ripe for that kind of a thing. And we need to be extremely careful, especially as we go into these election seasons and we really study the candidates of who we want to vote for. We need to really dive in what their perspectives are on the citizens and maintaining their own defense. Because the government is not going to be capable of doing that. Like I say, we're seeing this in England right now. The government is not going to take care of you. You have to learn how to take care of yourself. And that's why the Second Amendment is fortified in the American spirit, because we are meant to be free, and by damn, we'll fight for our freedom. Anyways, guys, hope you enjoyed this video. Sorry about my voice. That's just the way it is. Anyways, you guys be safe. See ya.